the role of the media in forming impressions of Islam and Muslims in the US. Now, you see this, for example, with the news media. Before 9/11, I'd start my courses standard introduction to Islam, because my students didn't know a lot about Islam. Post 9/11, I started with books that talked about the media, particularly how television constructs reality. Because my students now all of a sudden thought they knew everything about Islam, but that knowledge came from television, not from the ways in which the majority of Muslims understand their own faith. And you see this in polls. The Pew poll in 2007 indicated that while 58% of Americans said they knew not very much or nothing about Islam, 70% said that Islam was very different from their own religion. I love that. 58% said they know nothing about it, yet 70% say that it's different. 35% held unfavorable opinions of Muslims. American Muslims specifically at 29%. The only group rated lower than us as Muslims, of course, were atheists, unfavorable to 53% of those surveyed. On TV, you have these very poor representations of Muslims. I asked my students, so name a Muslim on television, and there's usually a dead silence, and then someone comes up with Apu from The Simpsons, and then someone else says, but Apu's a Hindu, he's not a Muslim. Dave Chappelle is probably the most famous Muslim on television, and yet none of the characters on Chappelle's show are Muslim. Then we get to those characters that we talked about. Kareem Said on Lost, Saeed Jar. I always get confused because the Muslim character somehow is always called Saeed, which also puzzles me a little bit. Someone points out wrestlers on television, they're all heels, the Muslim wrestlers. And television doesn't reflect the reality of, what a surprise, television doesn't reflect the reality of American Muslim life. Most notably the fact that American Muslims are equal in wealth and higher educational achievement than non-Muslims. The Newsweek cover story from 2007 on Islam in America. 26% of American Muslims had household incomes above $75,000 compared to 28% of non-Muslims. 24% of American Muslims graduated from university or done graduate work compared to 25% of non-Muslims. So Muslims were just as high as any other group in terms of academic achievement and wealth. And the majority of American Muslims are professionals. Engineers, doctors, professors, lawyers, business owners. Jenny Abdo, in her book Mecca and Main Street about American Muslims, talks about this, dispelling the stereotypes of Muslims as un-American. In fact, they're the American success story. And yet you don't see this. What you see are those different images. Those of us who are academics, if you haven't picked up your copy of the Chronicle of Higher Education this week, you'll notice a DVD insert, Obsession, Radical Islam's War with the West. That's now an insert into this week's Chronicle. Those that live in swing states, you'll get that mailed to you. Check your mailboxes. Elijah, it'll be interesting to see if when you get home you have this in your mailbox. That's the kind of stuff that's being put out there as images of Islam. And there's nothing new here. Jack Shaheen has written the classic book, Real Bad Arabs, on the ways in which 19th and 20th century film depicted Arabs and Muslims as bloodthirsty men or women who were either silent or oppressed. This trend, of course, increased after the collapse of the Soviet Union, where the bad guy now becomes Muslims, used to be communists. And I get it, I understand television melodrama and the good guys, bad guys sense of things. You have to have a good guy, you have to have a bad guy. At this point, we as Muslims are the bad guys. I understand that, except the problem is things work both ways. TV borrows from the headlines. We talked about those ripped from the headline kinds of stories. Sleeper Cell did this. Kamran Pasha, who was one of the producers, who was here on Wednesday, talked about that. The episode that he did, episode 4 of the first season with the Yemeni cleric, that's straight out of the headlines. And on the discussion on Wednesday about torture, that the torture performed on 24 is directly connected to the actual torture that actual Americans perform, in Iraq, in Guantanamo, in Abu Ghraib. I want to talk about Showtime's Sleeper Cell. Picking on that because it really was the first show created, and Kamran talked about this on Wednesday, created post 9/11 specifically to deal with representations of Muslims. And I remember getting the promo for this from Showtime in 2005 called Know Your Enemy. And this promo, Know Your Enemy, starts with Yo-Yo Ma and Alison Krauss, Alison singing Slumber My Darling. Children's Lullaby over images of children's drawings, post 9/11, children's drawings in reaction to 9/11. And the message is perfectly clear. Our kids are at risk. Will we slumber through another horrific attack? In a conversation between the series star, Michael Ealy, and two of the advisors to the show, included as a bonus feature on the DVD, the first season DVD, the issue of racial profiling was raised. I'd love in the conversation to talk with people about that. It's ironic here to see an African-American actor talking about profiling Muslims, and troubling to hear the response that it was necessary to profile anyone who was traditional Muslim looking. And that's what Michael said, traditional Muslim looking. And you want to say, well, given the diversity of the Muslim world, particularly in North America, what does that mean? 25% of us are African American, 1/3 of us are South Asian, some of us are Middle Eastern, some of us are Iranian, some of us are Caucasian, some of us are Latinos. Who are you going to profile? But the cast was interesting of Sleeper Cell, for those unfamiliar with it. It's a multi-ethnic cast, a Bosnian, an Arab, a French convert, an American convert, and an African-American star. I actually had the creators, Ethan Reif and Cyrus Voorhees, come to LMU and screen the pilot at my university and talk about this. And there's an ambivalence here. So on the one hand, you got for the first time, and Kamran Pasha talked about this, a Muslim-American hero. Michael Ealy's character is an American Muslim hero. It also deals with some of the nuances of Muslim life that are absent from the television screen. Very simple things. People celebrating a child's birthday. Notions about dietary restrictions. Washing before the prayer. The day-to-day stuff, the lived religion of being a Muslim in America. Except, of course, it perpetuates the old stereotypes about Muslim violence, suggesting that any Muslim could be a terrorist. There are 2 seasons of the show in 2005, 2006. And again, there's much to admire in both seasons. Sometimes one gets a very nuanced portrait of American Muslim life and the hard realities for Muslims in a post-9/11 world. But the show is also deeply problematic. The Muslim hero, Michael Ealy, is caught up in cycles of violence and revenge. There are Muslim terrorists who are planning their next attack on American soil. But this show somehow makes all American Muslims objects of suspicion. In the commentaries for the show, the creators talked about the first Gulf War as the key moment for Islamic radicalism. In doing so, they were off by over a decade. For many of us as scholars of Islam, that radicalization took place in 1979 with the revolution in Iran and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Ignoring the events of 1979 allow us to forget America's role in the development of radical Islam, selling weapons to both Iran and Iraq during their war. These days when we worry about Iran, and rightly so, having perhaps nuclear capabilities, no one's bringing up Iran-Contra, where our president sold weapons to the Iranians. Or what about the largest CIA operation in history, to gather, arm, and train the Mujahideen, who of course would become the Taliban. In the show, they talked about the fact that they were balanced in the sense that one of them was to the right, meaning one of the creators, that one of the directors was to the left. And I keep thinking now of Jon Stewart's great line when he's interviewed by Bill Moyers on Now, thinking, well, that's television, where we say if we've got the left and we've got the right, we've got both perspectives. Cartoon characters have more than that. Cartoon characters at least have up and down. There's more to it than it's the left and it's the right. Both the creators mentioned, for example, they were going to show an American beheaded on the first season